we start digestion, all we have to do, I worked it out, all we have to do is do a certain number of slides each time, and we'll be fine. And we won't have a large amount at the end that we'll have to cover. Okay? All right. So, digestion. All right? It cannot begin until you get the food in. Right? Cannot begin until you get the food in. That's called ingestion. And what do you use? Well, you use your teeth. And what do you have teeth for? Crushing, breaking, shearing, chewing, breaking all of whatever you like to eat into smaller pieces so that it can actually be what? Swallowed. Okay? All right. So the first part is getting the material in, and that requires typically to break it down to smaller units so that you can actually swallow it. Once you get it in, you can start the process of digestion, and that process basically is to break down whatever you like to eat into its component molecules, small building blocks, because your body cannot absorb a Big Mac directly. Okay? You have to break it down and get whatever few components there are in a Big Mac. I'm sure there are a few. All right? All right. So, in order to do that, it involves secretion, absorption, and excretion. Secretion, water, enzymes, acids, buffers, coming from the epithelium, coming from different glands. We'll get into all that. Absorption, once you've broken down and gotten all those small molecules, the building blocks, you need to literally absorb them. In a certain sense, you have not actually absorbed all those materials until it's out of your digestive tube and in your circulation. Then it's really in your body. In a sense, even though it's inside you, if it's in that tube, it's still not really part of you in the strictest sense. It has to be absorbed in order to be circulating around and therefore useful to the cells of your body. And then you do get all those things, vitamins, ions, small molecules of various types, etc. It has to get into the interstitial space. And finally, there are some things that our bodies can't use, and those have to be eliminated. Okay? So that's excretion. All of this is done in your peritoneal cavity. Okay? Here. It has a series of membranes that hold together the different organs that are in there. Those membranes are called mesenteries, and they're shown in this slide. These little membranes here. See how they wrap around the different parts of your intestines? And they hold them in relatively the same place. Here's a picture I was telling you about in lab. Here's part of your stomach. Here's your liver. And there, coming off the lesser curvature, is this membrane here, and that's the lesser omentum. It goes from your stomach to the bottom of your liver, and it connects it. Okay? Not in a rigid fashion. It's not like cemented in there, but so that it's relatively going to stay attached, even if you twist and turn and whatever. Okay? Those membranes have visceral and parietal parts. They're called visceral and parietal peritoneum. You have lesser omentum, greater omentum. You have falciform ligament. All of which we mentioned in the lab. Sorry. Now, your tooth. has a wall. And the wall has 4 layers to it. 4 basic layers. There are modifications depending on the segment that we're talking about. We will talk about those modifications as we go along. But there's a basic structure. Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. 4 basic layers. Okay? The innermost is the mucosa. The outer, covering the outside, is the serosa. Mucosa is epithelium. Remember, anything that lines a tube or cavity is an epithelium. These epithelium basically are columnar in nature, but they also have glands that are built into the epithelium, and they also have a relar connective tissue called lamina propria. That's the yellow right here. That yellow is the lamina propria. The red on the outside is the epithelium. And the mucosal layer ends with a band of smooth muscle that you can see go right there. This band that goes up and back down. This band is smooth muscle. It's called muscularis mucosae. It's the end of the mucosal layer. So all of this part here, next to the lavender, okay, all of this, red and yellow, that's the mucosa. Okay? It has built into it cells that are endocrine in nature. And those cells are going to crank out a bunch of hormones, chemicals, that help to regulate and coordinate your digestive process. We will talk about some of those hormones, not absolutely all of them. You have columnar cells, okay, and those enteroendocrines make different hormones. Again, what we just told you, the hormones from these cells coordinate the different parts of the digestive tract and also the accessory structures, your liver, your gallbladder, etc., that are not part of the tube, but are attached to it and are important. The lining has folds, as you can see the folds, and anytime you have folds, that's to increase the area, which increases the efficiency of the process, whatever is going on. And those folds are called plicae. Okay? This book just uses this. In other texts, they're called plicae circularis, because as you can see, they go right around the tube. Okay? They increase the surface area, etc. All right. These glands, and we'll show you a picture a little later, built into here, into the mucosa. Okay? They're secreting substances, and they're carried to the surface, to the outside surface, by ducts, little tubes. Okay? The cells that make up the epithelium are very short-lived. They only last a few days. Conditions are pretty harsh in there. Okay? So, that means if they're lasting a short time, you have lots of cell division because they're constantly replaced. All right? So any treatment that affects dividing cells is going to set up the individual for digestive issues. For example, chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, unfortunately, is not specific enough yet that it can just target cancer cells. Okay? It targets dividing cells, which is what cancer cells are. Okay? And so, you're going to have digestive issues in your typical patient undergoing chemotherapy because it's going to stop the cell divisions that are normally occurring here in order to continuously replace the dividing cells that line your digestive tube. Okay? So that's always an issue. Even if the digestive system is not involved directly, it's a result of the treatment. Okay? The lamina propria, that yellow part right in there, has blood vessels and nerve endings and some lymphoid tissue. There are glands in there. There's smooth muscle, that band of smooth muscle. This red band right here, going right up there and back down. This is called the muscularis mucosae. It has elastic fibers, smooth muscle. Again, it is the last part of the mucosal layer. Inside of that, in the lavender area, in here and here, this is the submucosa. It's connective tissue, has intrinsic nerve fibers that are called the submucosal plexus. All right? And then you have this double red band here with a yellow, thin yellow band in between the two parts. This whole thing together, both halves, is called the muscularis externa. It has an inner part, usually thicker, and an outer part that's usually thinner. So the outer is the longitudinal layer, the inner is the circular layer, okay? And those are both smooth muscle bands, and that little fine yellow layer in between is a layer of nerves called a nerve plexus. In this case, the myenteric nerve plexus, and that's what controls the smooth muscle contractions that help to move the food along this tube. So that together is muscularis externa, has an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer with nerve plexus in between. And last, the outer layer down here, okay, this outer bit here, is serosa. It's called serosa for all the tubing that's inside your peritoneal cavity. So your peritoneal cavity is below your diaphragm, right there, below. Okay? The part of the tube that's above your diaphragm. What's the only part of the tube above your diaphragm? The esophagus. And so the esophagus doesn't have a serosa, it has an adventitia. A little slightly different. Okay? But they're still membranes that are on the outside. Okay? And they have lots of collagen fibers and things like that. Now, how the food gets kind of pushed along, so to speak, is you contract the inner circular layer versus the outer longitudinal layer. And that process is called peristalsis. You alternately contract the inner layer and the outer layer, and that pushes the food. It's called a bolus, B-O-L-U-S, kind of a clump of food, and it's moved along your tube, okay, as it gets processed in the different segments of your digestive tube. Okay, it's called bolus, moves from part to part. The two layers of muscularis externa contract alternately to move this bolus along. All right. How is this controlled? Well, it's controlled by now, hopefully you have some appreciation. Neural mechanisms are almost always involved, and hormonal mechanisms are almost always involved. Sometimes there are local mechanisms too, that involve chemicals that are locally released and help to affect certain processes. Okay? Neuromechanisms, that myenteric plexus, which here is between the two layers, mostly shown in white. Okay? This set of nerves between the inner circular, see how it goes right around? Inner circular layer, and the outer longitudinal. The longitudinal is going this way, the length of the tube. And the circular is going around the tube. Okay? And those are controlled by those nerve endings in the myenteric plexus.